The front door stood half open. Captain Nolan Mercer stopped on the front steps, his military bag hanging from his shoulder as the warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the quiet neighborhood. He had imagined this moment for nearly 9 months. He had pictured his 8-year-old daughter running into his arms, his small rented house filled with laughter, and his old roommate smiling in relief that he had finally made it home safely. Instead, the house was silent. And standing in the doorway was his roommate, Grant Holloway, whose face turned completely pale. Grant looked at Nolan as if he had seen a ghost. His lips trembled. Then he whispered the words that made Nolan's heart stop. "You shouldn't see this." Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise for more emotional stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be. Nolan had survived dangerous missions overseas. He had walked through dust storms, heard explosions in the distance, and spent countless nights worrying whether he would ever return home to his daughter, Ava. Nothing had prepared him for the fear that entered his chest as he pushed past Grant and stepped inside. The house looked different. Boxes sat near the walls. Several pieces of furniture had been moved. Sunlight entered through the living room windows, illuminating floating dust particles. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the air. Grant followed him nervously. Nolan's heart pounded. His daughter was supposed to be at school. He walked farther inside. Then he heard laughter. A child's laughter. And another voice. A woman. His footsteps slowed. He reached the dining room doorway and froze. Ava sat at the table wearing a bright yellow dress. Her long hair had grown far past her shoulders during the months he had been away. Across from her sat a young woman helping her with school papers. The woman looked up. The color disappeared from her face. Grant lowered his head. Nolan felt his stomach twist. For months overseas, he had fought loneliness by looking at pictures of Ava. Every letter from home had been brief because internet connections were unreliable. Grant had promised to watch over his daughter while Nolan served. The arrangement had been temporary, born from trust between 2 longtime friends. But now another person sat inside his home. And nobody had told him. Ava saw him first. She dropped her pencil. Her eyes widened. Then she ran. She collided against him so hard that he nearly lost his balance. She buried her face against his chest and began crying. The sound shattered every fear inside him. Nolan held her tightly while tears filled his own eyes. He had returned. His daughter was safe. But the questions remained. Who was the woman? Why had Grant looked terrified? And why had everyone acted as though he should never see what waited inside his own home? The woman quietly stood. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She appeared to be in her early 30s, wearing simple clothes stained with paint. She seemed nervous, almost embarrassed. Grant finally explained. 3 months earlier, he had lost his job after the factory where he worked closed unexpectedly. The rent had become difficult to pay. During the same week, Clara and her young son had been forced to leave their apartment after a building fire damaged several units. Grant had known Clara from a local volunteer center. With nowhere else to go, he had allowed her and her son to temporarily stay in the spare room. He intended to tell Nolan. But Nolan's deployment had suddenly become more dangerous. Communication stopped for weeks. Every day brought uncertainty. Grant feared adding more stress. So he waited. And then more time passed. Nolan listened quietly. Part of him felt angry. This was his home. His daughter. His responsibility. But another part of him saw something else. He saw Clara nervously standing beside the table. He saw Ava smiling for the first time in months. And he noticed a framed drawing hanging on the wall. It showed 4 people standing together. Ava, Grant, Clara, and Clara's son, Ethan. For months, while Nolan had fought overseas, his daughter had not been alone. She had found a temporary family. That afternoon stretched slowly beneath the bright sunlight. Ava excitedly showed him her school projects. Ethan shyly introduced himself. Clara prepared lunch while Grant answered difficult questions. Nothing seemed improper. Nothing seemed wrong. Only unexpected. Later, after the children went outside, Grant finally confessed the truth. Ava had struggled badly during Nolan's deployment. She cried nearly every night. She feared her father would never return. She stopped speaking at school. Clara, who had once worked as an elementary counselor, spent time helping her heal. She walked Ava to school. helped with homework, read stories, attended school events when Grant could not. She simply became the stable presence the child desperately needed. Nolan sat silently. Outside, sunlight illuminated the backyard where Ava laughed with Ethan. He realized that while he had been serving his country, strangers had quietly protected the person he loved most. Days passed. Nolan struggled with returning home. The military had changed him. Loud sounds startled him. He woke before sunrise. Sometimes he sat alone on the porch staring at nothing. Ava noticed. Clara noticed too. She never asked difficult questions. She simply placed coffee beside him during the mornings. She listened when he spoke. And she remained quiet when he could not. One afternoon, Ava invited everyone to the park. The day was bright and clear. Children played under blue skies. Families filled the walking paths. Nolan watched Ava run freely for the first time in nearly a year. He realized something painful. While he had been gone, his daughter had continued growing. She had learned new things, faced fears, experienced heartbreak, and someone else had helped her survive those moments. That realization hurt, but it also filled him with gratitude. Weeks later, another challenge arrived. Clara received notice that her insurance claim had been denied. Without money, she and Ethan would again lose their temporary housing. She quietly began searching for shelters. Nolan overheard the conversation. He remembered the drawings on the walls, the homework sessions, the comfort she had given his daughter. He remembered coming home to find his child smiling. For the first time since returning, he understood why Grant had frozen at the doorway. Grant had feared Nolan would misunderstand. He had feared anger. He had feared losing the fragile family they had unintentionally created. Instead, Nolan made a decision. He offered Clara and Ethan permanent rooms until they could rebuild their lives. Clara cried. Grant smiled with relief. Ava hugged everyone. The house suddenly felt warmer. Months passed. Nolan found civilian work nearby. He attended therapy sessions. He slowly adjusted to ordinary life. Clara began working at a local school. Ethan and Ava became inseparable friends. And the home that once felt empty became filled with activity. One bright spring morning, Nolan found Ava sitting on the front steps. She looked up and asked a question he would never forget. She asked whether families had to look the same to be real. Nolan sat beside her. The sunlight warmed the neighborhood. Birds sang nearby. He looked toward the house where Grant repaired a fence while Clara helped Ethan with homework. He realized that life had built something unexpected. Not through planning. Not through perfection. But through kindness. Months later, the community organized a celebration honoring returning service members. Nolan stood before neighbors and friends. When asked who had helped him most during his deployment, he looked directly toward Grant and Clara. He explained that courage was not always found overseas. Sometimes courage looked like a struggling friend opening his home. Sometimes it looked like a woman comforting a frightened child who was not her own. And sometimes kindness quietly built families from broken circumstances. The crowd applauded. Ava ran onto the stage. She handed her father a new drawing. This time there were 5 people. Nolan, Ava, Grant, Clara, Ethan. Above them she had written one sentence. The people who stayed. If this story has touched your heart, please share your thoughts below and let others know how kindness, friendship, or unexpected support has changed your own life. As the sun began to set behind the community center, Nolan finally understood what Grant had meant on that first afternoon. You shouldn't see this. Grant had feared Nolan would only see strangers inside his home. Instead, Nolan saw something far more important. He saw the people who had carried his daughter through loneliness. The people who had protected his family while he was gone. The people who had stood beside them when life became difficult. And he realized that sometimes the greatest gift waiting at the end of a long journey is not finding your old life exactly as you left it. It is discovering that kindness has been quietly keeping it alive. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise so more people can experience stories that remind us that compassion still exists in the world. Because sometimes the people we least expect become the family we need most. And sometimes coming home means discovering that love never stopped waiting for us.